Hello and welcome to the very first episode of Tactica Tuesdays. I am Star Mini Gaming James, joined by my co-host Paul Conti. Say hi, Paul.
What's happening, nerds?
And we are here to bring you the very first episode of Tactica Tuesdays, which is a new weekly show that we are putting out that focuses on the tactics within Age of Sigmar, and really wargaming in general, but we'll mostly focus on examples from Age of Sigmar. There's a lot of shows like Warhammer Weekly and like Andy and Rim that cover lots of other topics, to cover the news and rumors, cover new releases, cover other aspects of the hobby and the community. And Paul and I really felt like the tactics weren't covered enough, and that's part of why there is the untrue stigma that Age of Sigmar is not a tactical game, and in our eternal quest to fight that untruth, we decided to put this show together. But for our very first episode, we are focusing on the importance of the Alpha Strike in Age of Sigmar, because really that's what better way to start than the start of the game, right? Whenever we're covering tactics. But basically our shows are going to go as follow. We'll have upcoming events that we won't go as in-depth as shows like Warhammer Weekly or Andy and Rim. We'll have a brief Q&A where you can submit questions that are related to tactics within the war games, but specifically Age of Sigmar that you might need addressed. We have an example one tonight that was already put in, so you'll get an idea of what it is and how we'll respond. We want to spotlight other YouTube channels as well, because for myself, I don't really feel like there's anything more important or encouraging to a YouTube content producer than kind of getting that pat on the back or verbal thumbs up from another member of the community that what they're doing is noticed and appreciated. Then we'll cover our main topic, which, as I said before, in this week is the importance of the Alpha Strike. And then we will end the show with a bit of comedy in our segment that Paul came up with, Misplay of the Day. Which we will be focusing on a misplay that I made recently in Age of Sigmar. And hopefully you can learn from my mistake, and hopefully I learn from my mistake and don't repeat it again.
All right, and just some other thoughts to add on to that. As you may notice from what we're doing right now, we are pre-recording these. James and I are both busy guys. We're both dads. So, we're going to be doing pre-recording most of the time to give us flexibility to actually get this thing out on a regular basis on the same day for you guys. Does that mean we won't do occasionally a live show with a live audience and have a chat room and all that stuff and answer your live questions? We might do that. Are we going to be having guests in the future? Probably are going to have some guests. We definitely want questions and feedback from the audience. We want questions for our Q&A segment. After our first show today, we actually have a couple of more in the clip already. But once we get a couple of these in, you guys can see a pretty good example of what we're talking about, and the kind of questions that we're hoping to answer for the community. We're really hoping to get a more tactical focus going in discussion. And, we're not really looking to be overly competitive. The idea is really just to be thinking about this game in terms of actually playing the game and being a better player, rather than just being a hobbyist and just, what new things are coming out and all of that. So focusing on the gameplay.
Absolutely. And in some ways dispelling what I always call kind of like the boogeymen that are, rumored within the game, because you'll see in any game, online forums especially, they'll be like, this is overpowered, this is broken, you can't beat this. And 9 times out of 10, if you study it and you study the game, you find a way. And that's one of the things I really want to accomplish with this show.
Yeah. And also at least like a certain percentage of sticking it to all those people that are like, there's no tactics in Age of Sigmar.
Absolutely. That's more than a small percentage for myself.
Yeah.
Well, Paul, if you want to go ahead and touch on the upcoming events.
Yeah, so without further ado, let's get into this thing. Upcoming events for myself, anyway. I'm going to be going to an event this Saturday, the Gamer Grunts tournament. Let me get that information up here. The Gamer Grunts tournament at the Bearded Dragon in Bernardsville, New Jersey. Now, they have not released yet the official tournament pack for the event. They had been waiting up to June 15th for the release of the General's Compendium because they didn't know when that release date was going to be. And the plan was to use that if it had been released by then. So they are in the process of putting that out. That should be out by sometime this week. If you're in the tri-state area, interested in going to that event, as soon as I have it available, I'll gladly share that with anybody else. Feel free to shoot me an email at paulmconti@gmail.com, and I'll send that package over to you. I've been to Gamer Grunts events before. They're a lot of fun. Good folks. Mitch.
Except for that Mitch guy. He's not a good guy.
Except for that Mitch guy, right? Mitch, MC1 Gamer, should be there. Also, I believe the artist formerly known as Sustainable Center and now is HR Channel. He should be there as well this weekend. So it should be a good time. Hopefully going to get some battle reports out of that. Big announcement this week, and let me see if I can you lock on me so I can screen share?
Yep. I'm actually already locked on you.
Oh, all right. Sweet. Then I will screen share. And share. All right. So are we sharing me?
Yep.
All right, cool. So this big thing was announced recently. This is a 2-day Age of Sigmar tournament announced for Warhammer World using the matched play system that's going to be in the General's Handbook. Kind of a big deal. Not something that, maybe a couple of years ago we would have ever thought Games Workshop was going to be doing, but they're organizing this massive 2-day event in September at Warhammer World. Clearly a competitive-minded event. More info to come, obviously, but this just looks awesome. I'm really glad to see that Games Workshop is going to be on the leading edge of doing big competitive events. Hopefully, they're going to be sponsoring a lot more stuff like this. And then the other item that we have is the Seasons of War, which I believe James has a whole lot more stuff on than I do. But with the General's Handbook coming out, we are going to be having a new campaign starting up that is going to be using the information from the General's Handbook. This July 14th start date is actually before the General's Handbook is going to be launching. And rumor is that all of the Games Workshop stores are going to have the General's Handbook available for people to start building their lists and their armies with prior to the official release date at the end of July, so that they can start using it for the campaign that begins on July 14th. So you have more info on that, James?
Yeah, if you'll... oh, never mind. I guess I'll screen share then.
How do I unscreen share?
Same green button that you initially clicked.
There we go.
So here's the...
I still have no idea what I'm doing here, folks.
It's all good. We're still learning.
Yeah.
So this is the graphic that they put out today. The Season of War, I'm not going to read it all. You can read it yourself. It's on the Warhammer Age of Sigmar Facebook page. But basically, the campaign that they announced is taking place in the realm of life, which I'm not going to go too much in the story. If you want to know more about the story, you can find lots of that on my channel. I'm actually working on a couple more videos because I've fallen behind on that, reviewing the narrative. But basically, it's taking place in the realm of life, which is where Alariel is, and we have all the Sylvaneth and all. And basically, the Stormcast have established a beachhead there, and as you can see in this picture, that there's the beginning of these new cities that are being built there. And and all. And basically, whenever you fight a game in this campaign, because both GW locations and your friendly local gaming stores that are independent will be running these games. Whenever you win, you'll get what I was told was like a small sheet of paper or a small card or something, and that will give you like a code or something like that that you'll go onto GW's website and input it and basically report the results of your battle, including what army you played as, what army your opponent played as. And I believe there's going to be like a small comment section where you can put something that, if there's anything particularly that stood out, like if you had, one Stormcast Liberator that killed like 2 Mighty Lords of Khorne by himself, something ridiculous like that. But basically, this is the end of the Realm Gate Wars, which is the narrative that we've had so far, and this is kind of the launch into the next campaign. And this, coupled with a few other events that involve the different store managers here in North America, is actually going to shape what direction the narrative goes next. I'll talk more about that in another video as I get more details. That's still very early on, the whole store manager thing in North America, but it's exciting. I'm excited to be able to take part in shaping the narrative here.
Yeah, that seems like it's going to be really awesome, and I am super excited for there being like another good campaign. My local games workshop ran like an Escalation League sort of campaign when Age of Sigmar first came out. It was really successful. It was a lot of fun. Hopefully that they're going to build on that same sort of idea and do this. And hopefully this ends up being like a series of things, because this seems like a great idea.
I agree. I'd really like to see them continue with this. And honestly, it's, in my opinion, just another step in the right direction with all the others that GW's been making in terms of like engaging the community, looking for community feedback, and actually becoming a much more friendly company, I guess would be the best way to describe it. Not feeling like some kind of dark overlord, like the gods of chaos that they themselves designed.
Right?
They're the unknown fifth god of chaos. The Horned Rat isn't really chaos, never will be, but GW is really the unknown fifth one, or was. Alrighty, you want
Zeke's long lost alternate universe twin, the Lord of Refuses to Change.
Yeah, I was gonna say is the master of Zinch. Yeah, that's why Zinch changes, because this one refuses to change, or used to, right?
Yeah, right.
Zinch finally got to him.
Yeah. So I think that's all we got on events coming up right now. So let's move on to a little question and answer. And this one actually came in from Chris Holman, who is somebody in James's local community.
Yep. Part of the DFW Age of Sigmar Facebook group. If by any chance you happen to live in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex in Texas or nearby it, search for that group. Feel free to jump in. It's a very friendly group, unlike a lot of the others locally. If you're ever looking for a game or advice or just feedback on models or encouragement on your painting or whatever, all that takes place quite regularly on that group. But go ahead.
All right. So he actually had a really specific question, and I think the specificity of this question is really interesting, and I think it's speaking to the development of an actual metagame and the development of tactics that's going on in Age of Sigmar already. So his dilemma is this. He's playing dwarves, right? And he's commonly playing against an opponent that is playing Seraphon. The easy answer with dwarves to deal with Seraphon summoning is I take cannons and organ guns and I just shoot at the Slann, shoot him off the board early in the game. No big deal. Maybe they summon one or two things. I'm all set. No big deal. So the response now from the Seraphon players.
Oh, okay. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Yeah, you're going there. I thought you had forgotten.
Yeah. Go ahead. No. I'm getting there. So now the response is the Seraphon player is now running chameleon skanks and popping up behind his lines and shooting out his cannon crews before they get a chance to really do anything. So he's back at square one. He can't get his cannons in play to go shoot the Seraphon. So his question is, what do I do? How do I deal with this? So, James, what are your?
I love as you mentioned before I get into how we deal with this. I love as you mentioned that this is a nice, like tick for tat kind of thing. It's like the Seraphon player brings a summoner. The dwarf player responds by bringing siege weapons. The Seraphon player counters again. So now it's the dwarf player's turn to figure out the next counter. That's what I love about a good strategy game. And that's what I love about Age of Sigmar, is because it has that whole kind of rock, paper, scissors element to it. And you have to continue to change your list and develop to your opponent's tactics. Because as this continues, I would imagine that their ending list, as they continue to counterpunch to each other's moves, ends up looking quite different than either of their initial lists. I'm going to let you, whenever we get to yours.
Way at the end of this is some Seraphon player, way at the end of the day. Everybody is like counter. The end of the game is Seraphon player that's not bringing any Slann.
Right.
And completely like runs the table with everything because you're expecting him to play tons of Slann.
Yeah, that would be, it's like a horde of skinks. That would be funny.
Anyway, I'm getting way ahead of myself here.
Yeah. So I'll let you, whenever you, after I mention mine, talk about the first one you talked about with the miners.
Yeah.
Because that was your idea, and I thought it was very good. Before I get too much into this, I do have a video that I did in Tactica Tuesdays. The name for this show comes from a series that I had initially began, with which I was covering different topics in Age of Sigmar and wargaming in general. And I actually have a video on how to deal with summoners. And so I will link that below if you want more just general answers or more in-depth than what we cover here. But my honestly, the best answer I thought to how to deal with the Slann and would deal with these chameleon skinks was to bring gyrocopters and gyro bombers. Because as I talked about in my other video talking about dealing with summoners, they're quick and they have decent range. And so whenever you're really calculating the area of effect or the area of influence of a unit on the board, you're really looking at both their movement and their range. And now, depending on the circumstances that you have, maybe you can't move as far, so your shooting becomes more important because other units are in the way, they're blocking your movement. Or with a unit with flight like these have, your movement is basically just as good as having the shooting range anyways. And sometimes it's actually more advantageous because of, you might need to move around a corner or something like that to get a good angle to actually see an opponent's model. But I really like both of them because they have decent range and they're decently quick, and they're a quick response unit. They have a solid amount of wounds and a decent enough save. They're basically what you want to do quite often, which is move quick and hit hard and hit fast to deal with summoners, and they do all three of those, and they can survive well enough for the inevitable return fire in case you're not able to kill that summoner in an alpha strike with them. Right. But you go ahead, Paul. I honestly liked your idea even better.
Right. So my thought with this is to really counter their mojo with your own mojo. That dwarves have their own unit that basically do the same thing as chameleon skinks, and that's the miners. You can take your unit of miners and pop up behind their lines, and just even by having your unit of miners then sitting on the side of the board, it's going to force your opponent to play differently. They're going to be in a position where they have to keep some troops back because the miners' rule is that they can't pop up within 9 inches of another unit. So your opponent's going to have this tendency to keep some of their troops back to try and protect that Slann from your miners popping up. So even if you never pop those miners up out of the ground, you're protecting yourself because they're taking some of their units basically out of the game to try and protect against the miners. And then if they don't do that, then you pop the miners up and kill the Slann. Easy.
Right.
And if you're thinking in a tournament setting, all of these things, whether we're talking about gyrocopters and gyro bombers or the miners, these aren't unique counters that are only good in this situation. These are things that you can throw in your list that are good in virtually any game that you play. They have versatile use. They're going to be good in pretty much any gameplay situation.
They're both good examples of fast response units.
Right.
Which,
exactly.
when dealing with a summoner, is exactly what you need. You need a fast response to what your opponent is doing. Yeah, and then I know that you had also mentioned, and we don't have to go into as much depth on this because I don't want this segment to run too long, but there is always the option, if you don't have gyrocopters and gyrobombers and you don't have miners, or for whatever reason you don't want to bring them, maybe they mess up the composition of your list with whatever kind of comp you might be playing in a tournament setting. You do always have the option of spreading out your artillery if you've brought more than one. Putting your artillery, basically, one cannon on the extreme left of your deployment, one cannon on the extreme right, for example, prevents the chameleon skinks, unless they brought multiple squads, from being able to effectively hit them all at once or all rather quickly. And it makes them take another turn or two to, in essence, teleport to the next one. So you buy yourself some more time by kind of delaying the ability of your opponent to kill your artillery before they've had a chance to deal with their summoners.
Right. And it also gives you the ability to hang some of your troops back, like hang your melee troops back, and have your front line of shooters move up just enough so that you can use them to fire at your opponent's lines and get that counterpunch in. Yeah, those chameleon skinks, they can come in. Maybe they can take out that cannon crew, but man, you are gonna wipe them off the board as soon as they do that. And meanwhile, you're gonna be volley firing into whatever waves of troops are coming in, and as soon as they start getting in charge range, you move those guys back, you move your melee troops up, and you charge in.
Yep, absolutely. And again, Seraphon are no joke. Even once you deal with the Slon, you still have a big threat, but once you've killed the Slon, you have, in a lot of ways, leveled the playing field, and then it's just deal with them like you would any other opponent.
Right. And the thing you have to remember, too, is from the perspective of the Seraphon player, them getting rid of your artillery is like the equivalent of you trying to get rid of their Slon. So you're at a big advantage if you're able to keep your artillery on the table and operational.
Right. If only for the distraction value, if nothing else.
Yeah. Because
there's always the perceived threat versus the actual damage inflicted, and you may never even get a shot off that does anything with them. But if your opponent is focused so much on killing them and preventing his summoner from dying, there is value in that as well.
Yeah. And having artillery on the table makes your opponent do stupid things, which will be featured in next week's Misplay of the Day, featuring me.
I look forward to it. So I'm not the only one that looks like a fool at times, right?
Right.
I think we've answered that topic pretty well.
Yeah.
And again, as I said before, if you want more general stuff, I do have the video that I will link below on summoners in general and dealing with them.
Yeah, but I think it's really interesting that we see this starting to develop in the tactics of Age of Sigmar, with like the punch and the counter punch and the counter punch to the counter punch, and
right,
to go back and forth, and the metagame is developing, and there's real thought going into the lists that people are building and bringing into events and bringing to the table to play casually. They're not just throwing down their favorite models anymore. They're really thinking about it.
Right. Which I enjoy. It's a huge part of why I enjoy strategy games in the first place.
Yeah, definitely.
Alrighty, well that brings us to our spotlight segment. And do you want to go ahead, Paul, with your spotlight first?
Sure. I think since we're just sort of, this is our first episode, we're just kind of getting our feet wet in this, so to speak. I think a really good thing to spotlight, I think, was a recent topic of the week that Vince Venturella did, and I would encourage everybody to go watch like all of the responses to the topic of the week. And that was what your favorite Warhammer army is. And there's a very interesting reason for that, and that's it's the whys, and listening to everybody's reasons why they play the army that they play, it tells you a lot about the person, how they play the game, how they approach the game. And I think it'll help you to think about how you play, how you like to play. Think about your own favorite army, and think about it not just from the perspective of what's my favorite army overall, but what is my favorite army to play with? Which one, if it was pink fluffy bunnies, would I still enjoy playing with? So that's really kind of my shout out there. I think it was a really excellent topic of the week, and there were some really great responses that people had put into that, and some really good thoughts. I made a response. Yeah.
I normally like the topic of the weeks. Like, I don't think that there's been any that I didn't enjoy watching videos for, but I seldom watch all of them. And this was a topic of the week that, as you said, I enjoyed so much just listening to the different reasons why everyone played the armies they played. And because most of the people that make content, we already know who their favorite army is. Like, that's typically no big secret. But I watched every single one just as soon as people were posting them, and I kept checking back to see if there were new videos, because, as you said, it was a great topic.
Yeah, definitely.
So my spotlight of the week was actually a video that Paul did, which was a similar vein as this, but came out before Vince posted the topic of the week, called The Solid 7. And now this was in response to a game design video that Vince does, which Vince does these on occasion. I think they're great. They're honestly some of my favorite content to watch on YouTube. They're very in-depth, they're very informative, and they're very interesting. So, two eyes. But in this video, Paul talked about why he plays Empire and how that kind of fits to his play style, even more in depth, I think, than necessarily what you talked about in the topic of the week. That's not to say that you didn't talk about in depth, but I feel like this was even deeper on the reasoning behind like why that army appeals to you. And it was a good one. It's also good because it covers a bit of tactics, and it helps you kind of think like, why do I play the army I play, and why do I play the way that I play, which is a big part of growing and learning tactically, is that kind of self-evaluation of your own game. And I thought it was a very good kind of starting point for that.
Well, I appreciate that, sir.
Well, absolutely. And both those videos that we talked about will be linked below so that you yourselves can find them. And if you're not already a subscriber of Paul, because this first video is going up on my channel, the second one will be on Paul's channel. So go ahead and subscribe to him, which you will be able to find his channel because I'm linking his video below. So he puts out great content. He's honestly one of my favorite YouTube content producers, and I'm not just saying that because he's my co-host. I've said that for a long time. So check him out if you haven't already, because honestly, if you haven't already, what the heck are you doing? I bring up his videos all the time on my channel. Alrighty, and that brings us to our main topic.
Yes.
And as Paul, you came up with this one, I want you to take the lead on this one too.
All right. So our main topic today is the Alpha Strike. And what we mean by that is really that first major strike in a game where you're really doing significant damage to your opponent, and what the importance of that is.
So do you mean, Paul, that this isn't when my opponent snipes one zombie from my army?
Correct. This is, that first big charge where a player like wipes or almost wipes a unit off the board. And what the level of importance of that is. And it can, in my opinion, it really can totally sway how the game goes. Sometimes not so much.
Right.
Sometimes you rubber lance and bad things happen. But but I think this is something that I've really learned a lot, even more so. This is like a carryover concept for me from other games. That
right.
you strike early, and it creates this snowballing effect throughout the game that gives you a huge advantage. I basically, the example I would give is this. If you're both starting off with 5 units each, right? You're 5 on 5. If you're the one that pulls off that first big, massive charge, and you do tons of damage to your opponent on the charge, now you're 5 on 4.
Yep.
Now you're outnumbering your opponent. So even if they manage to get a decent charge on you the next turn, now, like, even if you start trading 1 for 1, like turn after turn after turn, then you're going to be the last man standing.
Right.
And then if they don't manage to get a charge off on that next turn when, to kind of even the score, now you got them outnumbered. And that's very significant. Now you're going to be able to have an overwhelming force up against them. And that effect just keeps snowballing throughout the game. Once you have them outnumbered, now you can start double charging, you can start double teaming things, triple charging, you can start dividing their forces, targeting things. There's a lot you can do. Once you gain that edge, that advantage of having a significant amount more on the table than your opponent does, in getting that early, that is a huge advantage. So you have some more thoughts on that, James?
Well, absolutely. I think first off, you covered exactly the overarching concept and why it's so important. And I just wanted to bring up that whenever you're playing these games, right, any kind of game, any kind of competition, basically your models and your troops you have on the table are the resources you have available to you. And when you strike and you kill an opponent's unit or cripple an opponent's unit, whatever it might be, before they have the opportunity to strike back to where they are weaker in their attack, that's in essence, as you said, the 5 on 4, you've reduced their resources that they have on the table before they have a chance to reduce yours. And so the General's Handbook is about to come out, so we don't actually have points yet, but I've been told that the points are similar to how GW structures their other games. So expect a 1,500, 2,000 point game to be pretty standard, and to unit point cost to be similar to how all their other games have been structured point wise, not necessarily the same amounts. But let's just imagine that you're playing a 2,000 point game and you've managed to take out 250 points of your opponent's army before they even strike at you. You've now in essence changed the game to they have 1,750 versus your 2,000. And the big thing is that not only are you reducing their resources they have available, because in essence that's how you win, right? You reduce their resources faster than they reduce yours, but also you've reduced their ability to impact your important units. If you are playing a death army and you have your summoner, whatever your big boss might be, that's integral for your army to function, by knocking out something important of theirs and reducing their ability to fight back, that's a huge advantage because you've increased the survivability of your key units, and you have really dictated the way the entire battle can go. Now, I want to point out though that if that happens to you, don't worry too much, because Age of Sigmar has a nice kind of counter mechanic in the game with the way that priority works. Because if I lose priority the first turn and I get hit first, so I now have the 1,750 left on the table. If I win turn 2's priority and I get to go in essence twice in a row, in a way, it's my, what is that, like 3,500 points against their, well, it's a little bit more than that. I'm not going to worry about the math, but in other ways, I've basically doubled my resources on the table before they get to attack for that second time. So again, don't worry too much if it does happen to you, because there are mechanics in the game that allow you to catch up.
Yeah, that is definitely an interesting idea, that the turn priority definitely does have a big impact on it. And I totally agree with you that to view the models you have on the table as resources is a very key concept. I think in any game you play, you really need to figure out what your currency is, what your resource is,
Right.
and you need to be able to manage that and have a good idea of how to preserve it, how to expand it, how to stop it from bleeding.
You want to basically invest it well. You don't want to pay your dollar worth of unit and get 50 cents of theirs back.
Right, exactly. Which is why, armies that summon can be really strong, but at the same time, armies that summon can be a little bit of a push because, if you're summoning zombies aren't that strong of a unit. So, you're constantly getting more, but you're getting more of something that's not that great.
Right. You're basically summoning pennies back onto the table whenever your opponent's average unit is $1. Yeah.
Right. But that big pile of pennies at the same time, it adds up, and it also, and this is the other thing that I really wanted to mention about this, that big pile of pennies can deny your opponent the alpha strike. That can just get in your opponent's way. And sometimes if you can just put something big and bulky and not necessarily that valuable in your opponent's way that can just soak damage, take tons of hits, take lots of wounds, and just either you don't care if it dies or you just keep resummoning more, or it has high armor and some other save or whatever. Those are the kind of things that are really valuable to just throw up there at your opponent and just say, come at me. And it lets you dictate where that first strike happens. You throw something at them to kind of let them throw away their good positioning for a first strike. And then meanwhile, you're positioning yourself in the background to counter strike against them after you basically have chaffed them up.
Yeah, you force their hand, because it's either they deal with this basically immovable object that you've placed out there and in essence waste their opportunity for their alpha strike before you've really done anything, or they don't deal with it and they move into position to try to deal with the rest of your army that's more important, and they have left themselves open to that immovable object. It's really a no-win situation for your opponent in most circumstances.
Right, exactly. And interestingly, this alpha strike concept is also, I think, why artillery and shooting are so powerful.
Right.
Because it's like no matter what, if you concentrate fire on one unit, then you're kind of getting that de facto alpha strike without even having a threat of reprisal, because you're standing off and you're just throwing fire at things. And shooting in Age of Sigmar is highly effective.
I think that's a perfect point for what I wanted to bring up next, which was we've talked about how important it is. And so if I'm playing the game now and I've watched the show and I'm like, okay, the alpha strike's important. I have to protect my resources. I have to protect my investment that I'm putting on the table. How would you, I guess, encourage or, kind of teach a player, or how would you respond to a player so that they don't overreact to it? Because it's certainly important, but if you become too afraid of it and too afraid of, kind of taking that first punch, you can really cripple yourself before the game's even begun in your deployment or your first turn moves or whatever. If you are so afraid of taking that first punch and you got first turn that you basically spent your turn hiding and camping and trying to, bolster your forces to weather that first storm, you've lost perhaps the most valuable resource of all, which is your turn.
Right. I think the high mobility in Age of Sigmar is really a tremendous resource for making those kinds of tactics work. It makes screening much, much easier so that you can throw units up front that can act as a barrier to your opponent's strike, that you're not worried about losing, and have your powerful charging units behind that your opponent's not going to be able to get to. And then as soon as you're in a good position to make a charge, you simply just slide those guys out of the way and you move forward. And I think that's a really strong tactic. It's something that I've been trying to actually do more myself, and it's one of those things that I always just kind of forget to do in the moment.
Mhm.
It's easy to sit here and talk about all of this stuff, but when you're actually sitting there at the table and throwing dice and maybe you've had a beverage or two, you start to sort of forget how to actually play the game correctly.
Paul, I'm ashamed of you. A good general never inhibits his ability to command. I'm just joking.
If I told you the number of games of Warhammer that I have played that involved alcohol, let me tell you.
Be a 90% win rate for alcohol. Yeah, I'm just joking. I think those are great points. What I just wanted to add to that was, as we mentioned with the immovable object kind of concept, or the chaff that you're throwing out front, right? Something that your opponent needs to deal with. Also with your heavier hitters, use the terrain, right? Because Age of Sigmar is a true line of sight based game. So using terrain and stuff, hugging it, kind of hopping from hill to hill or house to house, hiding behind it, or at least reducing the ability of your opponent to shoot at. Or if it's something like woodlands that don't necessarily block your opponent's line of sight, but still give you defensive bonuses on casting Mystic Shield on your important units as they kind of hop around, whatever you can do to reduce the effectiveness of your opponent's Alpha Strike via close combat or shooting, which I think is more of what we're directly addressing in this part, is key. And again, it becomes a question of, does your opponent focus more on the heavier units? Because whenever you're including the chaff, yes, you do want this chaff that's either worthless to you and you don't care and your army is really not worse off for losing it, or it's something like a zombie horde that's just so difficult to actually remove off the table. You do want to build that unit in such a way that offensively it still has some capabilities, because you want the option to be able to punish your opponent if they didn't deal with that and they instead focused on your more important units. Now, even in the weakest units, if you want it to be like a bunch of Skaven clan rats, for example, they're not particularly terrifying if they're entirely by themselves. That punishment, right, of your opponent's choice in tactics could very well be you just tie up important units, right, for several turns as it takes time for them to chew through it, or else they have to withdraw from combat and basically lose that entire turn for that unit if they're choosing to do so. But again, you need, whenever you're doing this and you're kind of playing against an Alpha Strike and how you respond to it, you give your opponent multiple fronts that they have to deal with. Do not allow them to concentrate too much on just one threat at a time. You don't want this to be the classic kind of tower defense scenario where it's like one enemy comes up, then the next enemy, it's like short wave after wave after wave. You have to hit them multiple angles, multiple threats at once. That's how you deal with an opponent's Alpha Strike.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Did you have anything else you wanted to add to that? Because honestly, that I feel like covered the importance of you doing it and how to not be crippled by the fear of your opponent doing it to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the big thing is to arrange yourself so that you can absorb your opponent's strike and set up your own. That's
Right.
I think, really the big key, and that's similar to tactics that were being used in 8th edition Warhammer as well. People
Right.
were using chaff. They were putting things out front that were kind of baiting charges, and they were using it to set up, getting your opponent to get repositioned based on that. Now you don't have those technical little rules anymore about movement that we had in 8th edition, but we have the effects of all of the free-flowing movement now in Age of Sigmar, which is, some people will complain about Age of Sigmar's free-flowing movement and saying that, like, oh, it's quote-unquote less tactical. I think it creates a lot more problems and things you have to think about when any unit can go in any direction at any time. It throws completely different monkey wrenches into things, and there's a lot more possibilities, and it makes it really interesting when you can get your you don't have to worry about getting your chaff out of the way because you can just slide it to the left and charge in.
Yep.
And it's no big deal at all.
Yep. And even throw your chaff into that combat if you really want, just to, give that little bit extra oomph. I mean, like, obviously, you're moving to the side a little bit to allow your heavier hitter in, but your chaff still has a useful part to play even in that combat, even if it's only tying up the opponent.
Oh, yeah.
But actually, you've inspired me. I think we'll do an entire video on the importance of chaff in your army and the ways to use it. Don't underestimate what may at first appear to be in the War Scrolls the weakest or the most useless unit, because they definitely have their place in Age of Sigmar.
Yeah, I feel like every War Scroll in Age of Sigmar has a purpose. It's all there for a reason. And
there's nothing that's unplayable.
Yeah, there's a couple that are really only playable for fluffy reasons, but they're playable nonetheless.
Yeah, you just have to work harder with those to maximize the effect of them.
Yep. Yeah, they had a few special characters that were left over that had a little bit of fluff baggage.
Right. Yep. Well, I think that wraps up the main topic. So, just again to end the show with something that's showing an example of tactics and how misapplying them or not using them appropriately can cause a bad situation for you. So for today's misplay of the day is my own, and it was at the opening of GW number 100, which I am repping the shirt for. Got this there, which was pretty awesome. But I was running a demo game for Age of Sigmar, and I had brought a death army that wasn't designed to run a demo game. I brought a couple other armies like Seraphon and all, and I brought a little bit more toned down models for them. But I was also going to play a competitive game later in the day. That's why I had my death army there. Well, a guy came up wanting to play a demo game, and he said, I want to play a big demo game. We were playing 100 wounds because it was the 100th store. And so I was like, okay, well, I only have this army. It's pretty tough. And he's like, that's fine. I don't mind if I lose. And I was like, okay. I hate winning demo games. I'm never going to like intentionally just throw it, with something ridiculous, because that's no fun for anybody. But I would much rather have my opponent win than I'm teaching the demo game, because that's a great first experience, right? You win your first game. Oh, yeah. Well, anyways, I have my Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon that I'm very proud of, Lady Sinessa, who I've spent many an hour customizing, the rider, the mount, and the base. And she has done particularly well in game. She's built up a reputation locally at several of the shops. Some of the people that work at the shop will groan slightly whenever they see her come out, because the dice gods love her. She does amazingly well. She's never even come close to dying until this demo game. I'm teaching a brand new ranked newbie guy how to play, and I did not follow my own advice, and I didn't bother to pay attention to the special rules that the Saurus Warriors have, and that the Scar Veteran on Carnosaur has. So I charged her into a group of about 25 Saurus Warriors, thinking this is a nice, easy kill. She has her Death Lance and her Blood Chalice and her Vampiric Shield, and she's cast Mystic Shield on herself. She will be fine. Well, I charged in, and I didn't realize that the commander effect for the Carnosaur gives you basically the ability, if you roll a 6 when attacking, you generate an additional attack, and you can generate additional attacks off of those additional attacks. So it can, theoretically go on forever. Well, a squad of 20 or more Saurus Warriors gets the bonus you add +1 to their attack rolls. So this had now come from a 1 in 6 chance of generating extra attacks to a 1 in 3 chance. And so suffice to say, even with my 2-up save, in one round, my opponent had generated about 70 attacks in total, because the Saurus Warriors have their close combat weapon, which these were equipped with clubs, and then they have their shield and jaw attacks. So, and each of these attacks can generate extra attacks. And so I took about 70 attacks, and a very high percentage of them generated extra attacks and had went through successfully to hit and went through successfully to wound. And my, I believe, 14 or 16, somewhere in that range, wound commander dropped all the way down to 5 wounds after 1 round of combat. And I had very foolishly and arrogantly not only flown her into this, but she was surrounded by, to her left, there was another smaller group of 10 Saurus warriors, and then immediately behind her was a group of 10 liberators and 5 paladin decimators who can inflict their mortal wounds, and every single one of those units turned their eyes hungrily to kill her, because my opponent knew, because I had told him, that not only had she never died, she had never ended a game at less than 3 wounds off of her starting total. And so his objective became kill that hero. And if I didn't have everything else that I had happened to have in my army nearby, including a Coven Throne and a group of skeleton warriors and spirit hosts and everything else that I brought nearby, and just chunked into combat just to try to kill these opponents as quickly as I could, and using her blood chalice and her ability to regen 1 wound each turn if she kills something. And then just the fact that the zombie dragon is one of these rare monsters that no matter how much damage it takes, it's still quite impressive offensively. If all these factors hadn't played in, she definitely would have died. She ended the game, even with all that help, at about 6 wounds left. And that's including that she rolled on the D6 to regen with the chalice. She rolled a 6. So she regened as much as she possibly could and still very nearly died before the game ended. So that was a very arrogant and foolish move on my part, and one that I hope to learn from and never do again. And the moral of that story is, watch out for combos in Age of Sigmar, because if you're not aware of them and you don't bother to pay attention, your force can be decimated rather quickly. And the loss of my commander would have been huge in that game.
Yeah. And always pay attention to what your opponent's units do.
Yep. Which I did not do.
Yes.
Well, any other beatings that you think I need to take for that one, Paul?
No. I think she took all the beatings that need to be taken for that one.
Yep. She limped out of there bloody and battered, but very much still alive. Yep. Well, thank you all for tuning in. Thank you, Paul, for joining me and being willing to become, a partner in this journey that we're going on. I enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward very much to our next episode, which will be up next Tuesday as well. So look forward to that. It will be on Paul's channel. So as I said before, you can find the link to his channel in the video description below. If you're not already subscribed to his channel, subscribe, especially if you want to follow the show each week, because we will be alternating each week between the 2 channels. Do you have any final words, Paul, before we sign off?
No, I think that's it. I will see you all later on. Have a splendid evening, all you nerdy people.
All righty, and have a good one.